I'm James Lancaster, editor of Association Meetings International. I'm here with Richard Morris from Active Media Events at the Meeting Show in London. Nice to see you, Richard.
Thank you for inviting me, James.
Richard, you've been doing a bit of writing for AMI. You specialise in helping not-for-profits associations make money, basically, specifically around the kind of exhibition side of conferences. Just tell us a little bit about where you think associations in general are kind of going wrong in this area.
Associations, I think, they're not necessarily going wrong, but I think they have certain bits that they can really improve on. I mean, the things they do really well is, of course, they're there for their members. You know, they start with their members and therefore their delegates at heart. And because of that, they have access to understand the sort of content that will bring them along to the events. And also they have a 365-day-a-year marketing channel. And with that, the associations really do put the delegates front and center. Now, a commercial organizer looks for the money first and then tries to attract the audience to that. Whereas the associations, perhaps they need to pick up on the finding the money part, because they're definitely leaving money on the table out there.
Yeah, I mean, they're mission-led, aren't they? They're mission-led organisations. Is this really a question of resources? A lot of associations, of course, have very small staffs, executives, sometimes like 2 or 3 people in a room somewhere. Is this an issue of resource, do you think?
Well, I think some of the things, or some of the reasons why they leave money on the table may very well be that they're not able to understand what a sponsor, or the value of their audience to the sponsor, the value of the leads, or then they can't convey that value to sponsors when they're out there looking at it. And sometimes in the event itself, it's very often secondary, the exhibition sponsorship content. Yeah. So in terms of resource, as we all know, exhibitions are incredibly resource hungry. Obviously, sometimes with smaller associations, it's the same team that's doing everything throughout the year. And the squeaky wheel tends to get the oil, as they say. So operationally, if the ops isn't done, the show doesn't happen. Sure. Marketing-wise, if the marketing isn't complete, then there's no delegates there. But no one really notices whether there's been a lack of sales effort or whether there hasn't been sponsorship, because that's
until it's too late.
It's purely a line in the budget. So it's not as obvious as if those other two parts aren't there.
So is it almost an afterthought for a lot of associations?
It can be a bit of an afterthought. And what I think is important is that sometimes they'll put membership salespeople on to sell events, but events are very much a specialist thing, a very specialist sell, really. You're selling to a sponsor rather than selling to potentially a new member. So it does come as a bit of an afterthought, because they don't have that specialist information, they don't have that specialist skill in-house. And then when the event is delivered, sometimes the delivery of the sponsorship element, or what the sponsorship values, that then can be quite secondary.
Yeah. So let's talk coffee, everybody's favourite subject. You recently wrote an article for AMI about how major coffee house chains like Starbucks and Costa give people a choice, and how important that choice is to the exhibition side of things. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sort of came up with the coffee analogy because, everyone's back in offices now. They perhaps need that hit of caffeine as they get to the office or first thing after lunch. And when you go into a Starbucks or a Pret or any of the big coffee chains, you're hit with this, the board that is behind the counter. And the cheapest hit of caffeine is potentially quite hidden there. So the filter coffee, you don't really see it having any prominence.
No.
But on the board itself, a lot of attention is given to what I'd consider sort of mid-range coffee, the lattes, those sort of things. But also, for a little bit more money, there's the premium range. So those may very well be larger sizes. They may very well have foam or syrups or any sort of things. And as we know, at certain times of the year they do Halloween specials or Christmas specials, your pumpkin latte and so on and so forth. So that's where it started. But we can carry that along into the exhibition world. And when I talk to potential exhibitors, I will start by understanding what their need is and come to a conclusion about what stand size they need. So asking questions about what they want to do on the stand, who's going to be on the stand, how many staff, whether they're going to seat people down, and so on and so forth. And let's say we come to a conclusion where they need a 3 by 3 meter stand. That's their caffeine. That's the platform to meet the potential delegates, their potential customers. What we then look at doing is then introducing the mid-range stand, so potentially the 3 by 5, and that will be in a better position, have more open sides, and then finally we offer that premium stand option. So we will throw in a 18 or 20 square meter stand, 3 open sides, looks really wonderful. And the sell actually happens when that gets taken back to the boardroom or to the other decision makers, because that's when ego kicks in within an organization. They see themselves there standing shoulder to shoulder with their
competitors,
their competitors and peers. And that's where you get a lot of sort of social signaling, and that's when the sell potentially happens. So I do think using that process may very well help get an extra 20 or 30% exhibition revenue out of essentially the same thing.
A lot of your articles for AMI have touched on this kind of a lack of maybe understanding between associations and their exhibitors, or a lack of maybe care to find out what their exhibitors need. And that works, I guess, from, interacting with delegates. Do they want to interact with delegates, or do they want to have some say in the content of a program? Just talk a little bit about that sort of, those conversations that need to happen for an association to really understand their exhibitor and what they really need.
I think this is quite difficult for associations to do, because very often there's a certain internal conflict. Associations are there to promote the content that they have. They're there to essentially showcase the fantastic work that they've done over the course of the year. And sometimes they may see sponsored content or exhibitors themselves as actually a distraction to the hard work they've done.
Right.
And this sort of then makes it a lot more difficult to satisfy the exhibition, to satisfy the exhibitors and sponsors. I mean, the reality is that these exhibitors and these sponsors are industry experts. They've solved problems for delegates or for this particular association members dozens and dozens of times. They have a wide variety of skill sets that they can pull on, and they genuinely add value to the delegates themselves when they come in. So it's not all about what's going on in the main auditorium, but the value that delegates can get by having problems solved when they're actually at the show.
It's a tricky one, though, isn't it? 'Cause you don't want it to look like selling. There has to be that line, doesn't there, between the two? So how do you get them to interact in a way that feels natural, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, there's various tricks and tips that can be done. I mean, one thing I would say is it could be quite easy. It's start to change the language of how the organisers, the association, refers to sponsors and exhibitors, and position them as industry experts or knowledge partners to the event, so that there's some genuine value, so that delegates can see the genuine value there. A sort of more practical example was something that was done at an event I was working with an association a few years ago, and we had similar problems to what most associations experience. They have the exhibitors around the catering at lunchtime, but then there's a lack of engagement. So this particular event took place at the Coventry Building Society Arena, which, as you may know, overlooks the rugby ground. When we did this a few years ago, London Wasps were there, were using their ground, and we decided to just set up a fun interaction there. And we set up something called Pitch Under the Posts. We hired in some inflatable rugby posts. We put them in the corner of the room where the catering was and where the exhibition stands were. In advance of that, we contacted 10 exhibitors and said, would you mind being interviewed for a couple of minutes to answer 4 very specific questions? Then on the day itself, over the lunch break, this wasn't seated. Delegates could have their food, their coffee, but they would gather round this stage.
Right.
And that's when we were able to ask the exhibitors what their product was, what problem did it solve for delegates, and who else used it. So very simple but structured questions, which meant that it was quite a passive activity happening at the back. They didn't need scanning, and anecdotally, people went on from that little gathering to go and talk to the exhibitors straight away. So it wasn't in their face.
Yeah, that's great. And final question, I guess, what are the dangers of getting this wrong?
Dangers of getting it wrong. Well, I think on different levels, from a delegate point of view, if they're not seeing innovation at the event, then of course it's less attractive to go. And yes, they may be members of the association, but they can still vote with their time and not turn up.
And that can happen quickly, can't it?
An event
can become obsolete in a year or two.
If you're starting with, what did we do last time? What can we slightly change to do it this time? Then that content is on the slide and it turns into stagnation very quickly. The flip side, or the other side of the equation, is of course for the sponsors and exhibitors. And if they start to see reduced numbers, if they start to see reduced levels of engagement, it affects their return on investment, and they will vote with their marketing budgets and they will go and seek other things. But when you bring that together, what that actually means for the association is, with this reduced revenue, it means that it could affect all of the good work that they do during the course of the year. And perhaps more worryingly, is a commercial organizer could see the gap in the market if something is not being done very well, or if there's the opportunity, and they could literally steal the crown jewels from under them.
Yeah, so no more copy and paste. Richard, great talking to you. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid, but thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, James.